Today we'll be talking with Peter Frederick, a writer and activist based in United States. Peter works on issues related to the rise of Hindutva in India and especially about connections between hate in India and fundraising in the USA. Peter is passionate about his work confronting Hindutva. In our today's program, we will talk to him and try to find out to ask him about why he chose to work on India and a number of other topics. We'll start the conversation with Peter in the same context but after a short break. Welcome back and welcome Peter. Thank you so much for joining for this interview. I'm so glad to be here to see you and thank you so much for joining this interview.
Well, I'm appreciative to be here.
Peter, first of all, we would like to know that what inspired you to write this book, Saffron America?
Well, I've been working on this book, Saffron America, for about 5 years now. I started back in about 2019, when I began investigating then U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She launched her bid for the U.S. presidency and quickly began to uncover her deep and extensive long-term ties to entities in America which are affiliates of the RSS back in India, the BJP back in India, etc. And it was extremely worrisome to me. And so I worked on deeply documenting those ties and tracing her financial donations as both a member of Congress and a candidate for president, uncovering ultimately that, especially from the very outset of her political career, running for Congress in Hawaii, that anywhere from 20 to 25% over the first few years of her candidacy for Congress, anywhere from 20 to 25% every year of her donations were coming from entities in America that are linked to the RSS BJP back in India. And from there, I wrote an entire article about that, exposing it, but then realized that she was not the only person, the only political candidate in America with these kinds of links, as far as with financial ties to donors in America who are affiliates of RSS BJP, as far as somebody who's been attending events both in America and abroad, which are events hosted to promote Hindu nationalism or hosted by the RSS BJP, began pulling the strings and unraveling this whole web of the family of Hindu nationalist organizations here in America, which has been present for decades, which has embedded itself in American society and now increasingly in American politics. And certainly as somebody that's concerned about what's happening in India in terms of the rise of autocracy, authoritarianism, fascism, many people, myself included, even call it, as well as an American citizen who's concerned about the direction his own country is taking, and the influence of foreign actors or actors who have foreign interests on our political system and our society. I really wanted to dive deep in and expose this whole ring. And so over the past 5 years, I did that. And then the final product, to date, at least, there's much more research to be done. But the final product is now Saffron America.
You know, there's a lot of things that is not right in our world. Why does Hindutva deserve a special consideration?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's certainly actually in terms of being here in America as a U.S. citizen and trying to get Americans who have no connection to India to pay attention to what's happening in India with regards to the rise of Hindutva. It's one of the major challenges that I and many other people face. Of course, there's so many other really significant issues, tragic issues of human rights abuses, of authoritarian governments around the world. You know, I would point to the situation with Russia and Ukraine, for instance, and the iron grip that Putin has over the nation of Russia. I would point, of course, to issues like the human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, or increasingly now we're seeing in areas like Nigeria and other areas of Africa, persecution of Christians. Of course, in Syria, we've seen with Assad. There's so many other situations we could point to. One of the reasons that I focus particularly on the rise of Hindutva is because at this point, India is, well, it's become the world's most populated, the world's largest in terms of population nation. Globally, one of the most influential countries. Out of most of the countries in this world where there are extreme human rights violations occurring, India is perhaps exceptional in being one of the very few which has traditionally been a secular pluralistic democracy during its existence. In addition, India is basically at this point a de facto ally of my own country, of the US. Which as a citizen is particularly concerning for me. So for those reasons, but beyond that, Hindutva is a fascist movement at its core. The Hindu nationalist ideology that controls India today through the RSS, BJP, has its roots tracing all the way back to the 1920s, 1930s, which was the exact same time that the European fascist movements in Italy and in Germany were rising and taking root over there. And so Hindutva has roots going all the way back almost 100 years to connections to the original fascist movements in Europe. Well, those fascist movements are long gone. They've been defeated. However, the fascist movement of Hindutva has, over the past 100 years, flourished to the point that it now controls the world's most populated nation. The Hindutva movement with the RSS, basically as its fountainhead, is the world's oldest, largest, and fastest growing fascist movement. And so with it being now today in complete control and iron grip on power of the nation of India, the Republic of India, that is a situation where we're seeing the development, if not actually already to the point of having developed, of having been established, the world's largest fascist state. And not only the world's largest fascist state, but the world's largest fascist state, which is in basically at this point nearly an unconditional alliance with the world's oldest democracy, the United States of America. So India, in that situation, if it's the world's largest fascist state, it's a threat, of course, to the lives, the safety of all Indians, of all Indian citizens, but it's a threat to regional stability in many different ways, which I could go into. But beyond that, it's a global threat. It's a situation where at this point, what's happening in India is something that everyone around the world who has any kind of concern for the preservation of democracy, of pluralism, of basic human rights and civil liberties should be concerned about.
Peter, I do want to understand a little bit more about why people don't know. Do you think the reason for it could be that it was a never dominant philosophy in Indian politics since 1947? The politicians in India took deliberate steps to keep it at bay. Do you think that could be the reason why internationally Hindutva fascism is not understood or people don't know about it?
Well, yes, certainly I would argue that one of the reasons that Hindutva has kind of escaped the attention of the international community has to do with the way that the RSS especially was treated in India for a long time. I mean, it's been banned 3 times in its existence. The first time it was banned was immediately after an RSS member assassinated Mohandas Gandhi. And then the last time it was banned was in 1992 after the RSS and other affiliates conducted this mob demolition of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya in Uttar Pradesh. So because of that banning, that kind of tamping down of the RSS within India itself and the way that the Indian government responded to the movement, I think that diverted the attention of the international community away from awareness of the issue and the movement, because the movement in many ways was not growing as quickly as it has over the past 20 to 30 years. And because it was also being kind of dealt with within India internally. Additionally, while the RSS was being banned, the RSS was also quietly, systematically conducting a lot of its work behind the scenes for the past 100 years, infiltrating the sociopolitics of India and stacking the ranks of the civil services and so many other different bureaucracies and getting their people into power. And also spreading their ideology throughout the nation in just kind of a quiet, systematic manner, which went under the radar, as you will. Beyond that, now today, although Hindutva has basically been the ruling ideology of India for over 9 years, the international community, and especially the Western world, has a difficult time, I think, in their perspective on the ground situation in a lot of other in most places around the world. Most of us in America here, for instance, we are either one, we're in a bubble where the only thing we're paying attention to is what's happening in our country in America, or two, if we're paying attention to what's happening somewhere else on the world stage, we're oftentimes operating in this situation where we think of Russia, for instance, in terms of the USSR and what we remember about that from 30 years back. We think of China in terms of the revolution there and Mao and what happened there. We don't think typically in terms of the current situation of these nations, in terms of these nations being evolving, living creatures. We oftentimes get too locked into viewing these nations through a static lens without understanding that the status quo does not remain the status quo for long. And so in context of India, especially speaking as an American, but conjecturing about how a lot of other people around the world outside of India probably do think about the nation, I believe that many people just get locked into this really simplistic view of India that is along the lines of thinking about, well, India is the world's largest democracy, which it has been since 1947. India is the land of Gandhi, which it was. India is, the land of Bollywood and yoga and all of these things, which it is. And yet we don't have the bandwidth or maybe the respect to pay attention to the complexities, both of the current situation as well as of the past. And so when we think of it in the past, like most Americans, for instance, have not even any awareness of the partition in 1947, which was perhaps the most monumental and impactful event that guided the direction of both the Republic of India and of Pakistan. Most Americans have no concept of the complexity of India, even just in terms of culture, of the number of different languages spoken, of how you go to deep south and people eat dosa, you go to deep north and people eat roti. There's so many ways in which it's vastly diverse that people have not been even able to wrap their heads around that. And so when it comes to something like the ideology of Hindutva, well, people in America, unfortunately, especially in our information age where our attention spans are -5 seconds, people in America don't like paying attention to intellectual, boring stuff like ideology until the point at which the attention is demanded because the ideology has taken a root to such an extent that it's causing pain that you can no longer ignore it. And I think that is the sort of approach that I would argue Americans have taken with a lot of other international situations around the world over the past few decades. I think what's happening in India today should be just yet another wake-up call to the international community and especially to my own country that we need to, especially as a way of paying respect to the humanity of others around the world. We need to understand that situations are nuanced.
Peter is with us on the show, but it's time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Peter is with us and we are talking about the rise of Hindutva. Now moving on, Peter, economic and political deprivation, communal riots, prevailing illiteracy, poor health and social conditions are the main characteristics of Muslims community of India. What do you think? What's the main cause of all that?
Well, the main cause of the issues that Muslims are facing in India, I mean, you mentioned, that in terms of a lot of these data points, literacy, economics, etc. Certainly, unfortunately, Indian Muslims are far behind in that. But at this point, in order to overcome those factors that are holding them back, they need to overcome the threat to their lives and their existence. At this point, the main thing holding them back, the main threat is the threat of Hindutva. Hindutva is the world's largest Islamophobic threat. It's something that the Muslim community, the Muslim Ummah, globally needs to be deeply concerned about and deeply involved in combating, whether they're from India or not. Within India, if you're a Muslim, whether you're literate or not, you can no longer safely go to school. You can't go to school safely, especially if you're hijabi. You can't go to school safely to become literate. If you're economically disadvantaged, you can't even run a small shop anymore without risking having a mob come up and surround you and tell you to get out of the neighborhood because you're a Muslim and you're not allowed to sell to Hindus. If you're a Muslim who wants to go to masjid, which is probably one of, I would argue, within any religion, the religious site, your place of worship, is the first stop that you should go to as far as if you want to improve your life and advance, gain literacy, gain job opportunities. And you can no longer safely go to masjid without the possibility that, especially during one of your festivals, during one of your festivals, that you'll again be surrounded by an armed mob that's chanting slogans and intimidating you, and maybe even then the government will come along and the police will invade your prayer hall. Maybe even then the government will come along and bulldoze your masjid. That's the chief threat. That's the chief problem. So all of these other issues of literacy, of job opportunities, anything else that you could name as far as something for improving the lives of Indian Muslims, all of those can only really be dealt with once the issue of Hindutva is dealt with. And I often compare this, for instance, I've engaged with the issue of caste a lot in my work in the past. Anti-caste warriors with people who are from the Ambedkarite movement, who are attempting to work against the structures there of caste in India, and as in their lingo, to move the caravan forward, as Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, the author of India's Constitution, put it. The same situation with them is that in order to advance the anti-caste struggle, the chief obstacle and roadblock right now is Hindutva. Same situation with advancing the lives and improving the lives of Indian Muslims.
Peter, what do you think? Why international community don't take bold stance at oppression on Muslims in India and situation of Kashmir after suspension of Article 35A and 370?
Well, I think that if we want to talk particularly about Kashmir after the suspension of 35A and 370, Oh, there's a lot of reasons. I think that India's diplomacy was on point, and they were prepared. That they successfully managed to convince most of the, especially most influential international governments, especially UK, US, Canada, that it really was an internal matter. Um, and however, at this point, beyond just Kashmir, because I would argue that in a sense, Kashmir was the test, and that when the revocation happened, the annexation occurred of Kashmir, that the Indian government was looking at that and then looking over their shoulders and looking around the world to see how the international global community responds to it, which basically they didn't. There was a few mealy-mouthed, mild, toothless statements from various governments kind of questioning it, but nobody took any kind of an action. And that, from 2019 to now 4 years later, that emboldened the Modi government, where they saw that they could take this kind of aggressive action of annexing a state, of moving in there and ramping up the militarization to times 1,000, and stripping away civil liberties, and that nobody around the world would hold them accountable. And so from there, as Kashmir was a test, they have begun to a large extent implementing the Kashmir model across the entirety of the Republic of India, where they've begun turning India into basically a militarized zone, but especially a zone where those similar stripping away of civil liberties is present, where having started it, especially in Kashmir, now across most of India, you no longer have freedom of speech, expression, and so on. Now, however, at this point, although we saw in June of this year, we saw the U.S. government roll out the red carpet for Modi, bend over backwards for him, give him the joint honor of both being able to address a joint session of U.S. Congress, as well as being hosted at a official state dinner at the White House. And with that, I would argue that basically the U.S., as it has unfortunately been doing for the past 50, 60 or more years, is being pragmatic instead of principled, is placing profits over people, is trying to engage in geopolitical string pulling in order to drive the balance of world powers in the direction which it wants, which it thinks will benefit only American interests, without consideration for the interests of other people, including Indian citizens around the world. Now, however, thankfully, just yesterday, we're seeing a little bit of major new development on the world stage in terms of India, as we've seen what happened unfolded in Canada. Where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just went on the House of Commons floor and very dramatically, very boldly came out and accused India of apparently having assassinated a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. And then the Canadian government ejected from its country one of the top Indian diplomats in control of apparently Indian intelligence in Canada, a man who's reportedly from RAW, from India's external intelligence organization. So we're seeing there now some kind of fissures, some cracks, some good cracks in that veneer, that facade of treating India as though it is nothing more than still the world's largest democracy. Some of these nations here in the West are beginning to wake up a little bit, and even the U.S., some U.S. State Department officials are speaking somewhat in support of what Canada is doing and standing by Canada's decision. But up until now, especially here from America, I would argue that the two main things that America is looking at India from the perspective of profits over people in terms of what they can get out of India economically.
In spite of all that, when did you first observe the influence of this Hindutva ideology in America? Where did you find out that America is being saffronized?
Well, I would argue that I first observed the influence of Hindutva in America personally in my home state of California in 2015. In 2015, in September of 2015, Modi came to California. He was hosted or he was hosted for what they call one of his rock star receptions, where he spoke at a stadium in San Jose, California. Some tens of thousands of people, mostly from the Indian diaspora, attended. There were a host of U.S. Congressional officials and other U.S. elected officials who attended and joined Modi and kind of embraced him there. And I attended to protest outside. And this event, I would add, in subsequent research, I've uncovered that this entire event was completely organized by local leadership in California of the HSS, which is the American wing of the RSS, and of the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which is the US wing of the BJP. Now, this was a Hindutva event organized by some part of our Hindu nationalist leadership within America. As I attended the protest, I was assaulted on 2 occasions. This was back in 2015. And the first occasion was during the late afternoon. It was still daylight. It was in full view of the police, who were probably about 20 feet away from me. I had 2 signs, and a man ran up out of nowhere and grabbed one of my signs and tore it up and ran off. And I turned to the police and they said they can't do anything. The second occasion was in the evening. Dusk had fallen. And because there were so many people attending the stadium event for Modi, they set up an overflow section in a park out next to the stadium outdoors with a big screen. As dusk had fallen, this big screen was there. Modi was being projected onto the big screen from inside. And I went up next to the screen to hold my sign silently in protest as Modi comes on screen. While I'm there, I'm not a large person. While I'm there, a man of a maybe 300-pound man comes up, gets up next to me, and starts shoving me, body checking me, whispers in my ear, "I will break you." And I stand there, and then somebody comes up from the crowd and grabs both of my signs and runs off with them. This man next to me continues body checking me, threatening me, physically assaulting me. And then finally the police come and escort me away safely. And that incident left me realizing, I was already aware of Hindutva, but left me realizing that here it is in my own backyard, in my home state of California, where I was born and raised, that here in my home state, as I'm peacefully, silently exercising my First Amendment rights to protest a foreign leader, and not just any foreign leader, but a man who was previously banned from my country because of his role in a pogrom against Muslims. As I'm doing that, I'm facing assault for doing it. So if that's the situation for me in America, what is the situation for Indian Americans in America who oppose Modi or Hindutva? What is the situation for Indians in India who oppose Hindutva or Modi? And that, I think, was kind of one of the biggest wake-up calls for me, that it was time for me to start investigating, learning about initially Hindutva in general, what it is, its history, and its origins in fascism, and then also about the RSS, the BJP, the VHP, etc., and then beyond that, to learn about how it has connections, affiliates here in my home country of America, how the HSS, the VHP America, the Overseas Friends of the BJP, Save International, Ekal Vidyalaya, et cetera, are here in America. They've been here for since the 70s, since the 80s, and they're deeply networked, they're deeply pocketed, and they are now influencing American politicians, putting people in power, to the point that even now, as of last year, they've got people in advisory roles for the Department of Homeland Security. So I would say that 2015, that was really the origin point of kind of a wake-up call to me that saffronization is beginning in America.
Okay, let's jump to your book called Saffron America. I'm very sure, Peter, those who watched this interview a bit of, they'll be much interested, right? So you very well narrated how you organize. I just want to know, like, who is your primary target audience, who you are targeting through this book, and what kind of action or what kind of influence you want to have on the readers, and what the response you want to get thumbs up.
Well, one of my primary target audiences is American elected officials. I want to give American elected officials something that gives them a, a primer, a really like comprehensive but introductory view of the nature and the existence of these Hindu nationalist family of organizations in America, and what they're doing both in terms of their history, who they are. So I detail who the HSS, the VHP America, Save International, etc. The way in which they've influenced particular politicians, especially at the congressional level, people like Tulsi Gabbard out of Hawaii, people like Raja Krishnamurti out of Chicago, and so on, but also members of state legislatures as well. Ways in which they're also getting into the halls of local governmental power, especially the HSS, getting its foot in the halls of city halls, by getting city halls to platform them, give them resolutions, praise them, and just kind of generally empower the HSS. And ways in which anti-Hindutva, the anti-Hindutva movement around America is resisting, and sometimes successfully resisting, and that sort of thing. So my target audience is especially American elected officials at every level, at city, county, state, and federal in particular, especially federal, because federal level is the level at which they have the ability, the power to really take some kind of steps to tamp down the endeavors of the Hindu nationalist movement here in America.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for that. Like, as always, you know, it's a pleasure talking to you, and you give detailed information.